Alright guys, hey, this is Charlie with MetalWorks. I'm just going to run a little bit of a narration on the truck restoration here. And I'll be pulling in some of the technicians who did the majority of the work on the truck. We'll have Dave from the fab shop, then Heath from the body and paint shop, and then we'll pull in Ryan at the end during the assembly. So here you can see the arrival of the truck. It was an extremely nice Survivor original paint truck. And as you can see, it was a long bed 2-wheel drive truck. And first thing we did when we started the teardown was to pull the long bed off the chassis. And we actually convert that from a long bed into a short bed, as we'll be setting the truck on a Roadster Shop RS4 chassis, and it'll then be a 4-wheel drive short bed versus a 2-wheel drive long bed. There you can see now that the bed is cut down. A person could easily blend the paint on that and keep the original paint, but this truck is going through a full restoration. So we jump into the rest of the teardown of the truck. All of this is in preparation for acid dip. Every major restoration we've ever done at the shop gets acid dip. So every single piece of metal, trim, plastic, clip, piece of upholstery, everything you can possibly imagine needs to come off the truck. So here you can see at some point a crate motor was put into the Chevy. It's been an amazing Survivor. A lot of miles driven on it for how amazing that it still looked. The shop has done a ton of these 67 to 72 trucks, so the guys are very proficient at tearing them down and reassembling them. Here you can see the stock location of the gas tank. Once it's on the Roadster Shop chassis, the tank will be mounted there, so we'll no longer be using the stock location. You can see how nice those original floors are. Pretty amazing. The only little bit of rust was just at the very corners of the front of the rockers in the cab, the front of the cab. Really an impressive truck. Sometimes when they come back when they acid dip, you really see some hidden sins. You just never know what you're going to get for sure. But when this truck comes back, it's just really a nice starting point. So here we're pulling the cab off from the chassis. Forklift being a very handy tool when you're putting bodies on and off chassis. So again, everything here is in preparation. All the parts are laid out that are going to be going to acid dip. So now here we are back from acid dip. Again, super impressive. The cab is just in amazing condition. All the front sheet metal is just really great.
Alright guys, we've got Dave from the fab shop in here. He did pretty much all the metal work on the truck, so we're going to kind of just give him to give us some insight as to what he did during that process.
Found rust in the lower cab supports in the front of the rockers, so cut that out, and then treated the rust and etch primed and made new patch panels. Things that you couldn't buy, remade by hand. Some things you could find. Still got to tweak them a little bit to fit, obviously, but just treating rust and making sure it's going to last another 50 years.
So that looks like an aftermarket piece there.
Yeah, that was an aftermarket piece there. It took a little bit of tweaking to get it to fit right, and then replaced the front half of the rockers, just so it'd be easier to get in there to do the repair. trying to make everything look as factory as possible, so it looks like, you know, we were never in there. And then the factory long beds have 6 stake pockets, but the short beds don't. So to go with the short bed conversion, we removed the middle stake pockets and shaved all the holes. And while we were at it, the customer didn't want any stake pocket holes, so we filled all those.
Yeah, I was curious about that myself. I didn't know if that was just an aesthetic. It sounds like it was a mix of aesthetic and to make it look like a short bed.
Yeah, a little resto mod in there. Just clean things up. And the more time you spend on the panels too with the fitment and the weld up, the easier it makes things down the line with the bodywork. And also removed the front stake pockets too, to give it a little cleaner look inside the bed. And then we cleaned up the firewall, filling all the holes that weren't needed. Fixing little bits of rust. We shaved the fuel filler also because it's now got a tank underneath the bed.
Yeah, and the teardown, we were showing where the factory location is right behind the seat.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no need for that.
And then with the vintage air, you don't need the big holes pass-throughs for the AC and the heat anymore, so we shaved all that. And then I made a piece to make the firewall match side to side. And then for this, we went with an aftermarket fuel filler that puts it behind the tail light. And that was a chore to make that work properly, but I think it turned out pretty slick.
Yeah, so just a tear down of the original bed so you could get it over the body shop for epoxy. So anytime anything comes from acid dip, you have to prep it before you shoot it in epoxy, but then you can start your body work or your metal work after that. So that's Heath in the body shop. When we get to the point of the build where we're heavily focused on the actual bodywork and paint, we'll have Heath talking as well.
Yeah, on this one too, it was interesting because the customer didn't want any Chinese replacement parts, so the factory bed floor and everything got all body worked and finished out to be as nice as possible.
You can see it's Raptor undercoated. That's what we do on underneath all of our major restorations. And actually, here's the arrival of the RS4 chassis from Roadster Shop. So you can see this is how they come crated up, and they're already coated, and we just had to put the wheels on it to make it a roller. And we'll get into some more details as to all the aspects of the RS4 chassis here in the future. It just didn't have the coilovers on it at this point. Alright, here we are back in the fab shop with Dave.
Yeah, now that we got the chassis in, we wrapped it all to protect it because it came fully coated and ready to go. But we needed to fit the cab and make sure that everything was going to clear with the power plant and just continue with mock-up. I had to modify the front cab supports to fit around the suspension brackets in it. And then the doors were pretty solid original doors, but they still had some areas that needed some repair and some work done. So we patched those rather than replacing them. And then being a factory two-wheel drive cab, we sourced a factory four-wheel drive trans tunnel and converted the cab over for the taller tunnel.
Yeah, just to fit the modern style touchscreen radio, had to do a little modification on the dash there.
And then made a custom bracket for the vintage air that helps distribute the weight of the unit and doesn't mess with the firewall at all. And then pre-plumbed everything to make sure everything's going to fit before it's painted. If we need to change anything, then we can. Filling old holes and stuff in panels that are no longer needed, dressing edges, and just streamlining everything. Getting ready to test fit the drivetrain. Had to modify the front wheel tubs to go around the shock towers for the coilovers.
Yeah, it's a good amount of work, but it looks pretty cool too, all said and done, really. You had to notch that for the steering shaft to go through?
The frame?
Yeah.
No, it actually came Roadster Shop does a really nice job on their chassis, and that just happened to fit just like it should.
Okay, cool.
Then we set the epoxied bed on with the doors and the fenders on it, just making sure all the body lines and everything are lined up like they should. Also utilize the front bed bolts to anchor the toolbox so you don't have excess holes in the bed floor. And then just fine-tuning the fit on the cowl to the hood and the doors, making everything fit like a glove, and all the body lines line up real nice. And also filled unneeded holes on the bottom side of the hood too, just making everything look nicer.
So that's more of your factory fitment there.
Yeah. Yeah, the truck overall didn't have a bad fit up, but we wanted to get it just that much nicer. And then we put factory style bucket seats in it too, and the truck never had bucket seats, so we had to locate all the holes for that. And I set that up like factory too. Also added the cargo light, and the truck was not a cargo light truck, so had to add all that too. Added a charging port for the battery, for the trickle charger and everything in the fender well too, so everything's nice and hidden. More cowl work. A lot of pre-wire, putting components in and building mounts and stuff before it's painted. The factory bucket seats are really hard to find, and we found a set and I had to rebuild the majority of them, but we at least had something to start with. I hid the computer and things underneath the passenger seat, so I had to build a little tunnel for the wires to run through. And then did a cover plate so it's all nice and hidden. And then going with the hidden theme, put the fuse block inside of the glove box. So I made a custom shallow glove box for that with a little door. And then a cover plate to run the wires next to the trans tunnel. Next we put the drive kit on, just making sure that everything's going to clear and fit. Just part of the mock-up process. Then we finally got the coilovers in, so we were able to set ride height and start making sure that the tires were going to clear the fender wells and cycling the suspension. Just cycling the suspension, making sure tires will fit. Then customer wanted a spare tire mount in the bed on this one, so I built a tube spare tire mount that located into the bed. And then after we got the panels where we wanted them, we set the trim with a laser and then marked out and drilled all the holes so the trim's all nice and straight on the truck. Then set the radiator and intercooler and condenser combo and had to build custom brackets for all that. And then back to the fuel filler, we had to make room in the bed floor for that underneath. All the components are mounted. Checking all the badging and trim to make sure everything fits like it should. Again, more components. Nick lending a hand in making lines for the AC. And then Nick's checking tire clearance and opening up the fenders as needed.
So it wasn't much, but just enough to had to take a little off.
Yeah, just off the front of the fenders. As the tire comes up, it moves forward slightly with the 4-link suspension.
Alright guys, we've got Heath now from the body shop. Here he's going to help kind of narrate us through the body and paintwork process.
So usually what we do whenever we start these things is they come to us in bare metal. For us, the most important part of this whole process is making sure that the bare metal is prepped correctly, removing any surface rust, making sure the metals are really clean. We even use a metal cleaner from Glazeret that gets it super clean. We use a 203 wax and grease remover and a final wipe because that is your base, that's your framework. So everything's based off of the cleanliness of your panels and the bare metal prep. After that, we'll use epoxy. And we do 4 coats of epoxy, so that way we have some extra on there whenever we do our body work. We're not immediately sanding into metal. So after we get done with all the epoxy work, we'll let it sit for a couple weeks so the epoxy can dry. Then we can start our body work process, which whenever we do that, we start sanding it to give it a nice mechanical adhesion with Hunter grit, and then we'll do a red Scotch-Brite too, and then we'll start our filler work.
So like this is a brand new reproduction bed, but you can see there's still a lot of work that needs to be done even though it's brand new.
Yeah, so most of these cars, they're not straight right out of the factory, or even whenever we get our metalwork done. All the stampings, it creates highs and lows in all these parts, so we like to put them all together and block them all together too. So they usually just use a full skim of filler, and we'll block it like it's primer.
So board, just lots of prep work before you even get them into epoxy to start the actual body work.
Yeah. Like I said, this is our foundation, so you're putting a lot of money worth of time and material on this stuff, and you don't want it to fail from the ground up. Some of the products we like to use, PPG has an epoxy. It's CRE 321. Works great industrial primer. Have really loved it. It's a good build. And then we even are using it for our primer surfacer. Has good build, and we'll put 5 coats on it and block it out.
So the gray now is a primer versus the epoxy per se?
So the gray, they used a polyester primer on this truck.
Okay.
Which is still a really good, high build, good product. It has its pros and cons with it. So just depends on the build and the budget and a lot of different things on the materials that we use. Also, another thing we like to do, we like to prime cars once. Whenever you prime it, it has orange peel in it. So we like to start our blocking process with 100 grit, and that'll get rid of all the peel, and it'll give it the best chance to be straight too. It cuts it nice and flat. So then we'll go all the way out to 320, and that way everything's nice and smooth. We don't like to prime things twice. It'll just cause more work than necessary.
I suppose unlike a lot of the muscle cars now, we do these cabs get painted inside and out.
Yep. So using Diamond sealer, this is Glazerite paint. We like to use BASF, mostly Diamond and Glazerite. Yeah, it's just really good stuff. I've used it for a long time. Haven't had any failures with it. And sprays the same all the time. So doing this, we're using the Glazerite 90 line water base. Have loved the water base for 6-7 years. We we use it because it covers really well. You can paint parts and pieces have the same color, and especially with metallics, there's no doubt in if the color's going to match. Very easy to work with too.
I know on some pictures I posted, people questioned why we would spray the blue and then the white over top, other than I know that's how the factory did it. That's primarily the reason, right? Just so it's factory correct. It's per se you're wasting paint.
Right. The factory did it. I mean, painting the whole bed blue, and it's just easier to do. And we know that we're going to have to put the white on before we clear it anyway. So it's just easier to do it that way. Prep for bed liners the same way. We'll epoxy it, and then we'll Raptor over it. Usually like to use a black epoxy if we're using a black Raptor. That way the coverage is better. This one's blue, so still use a black Raptor or a black primer, and then a blue Raptor over it, and it still covers really well. And if it doesn't cover, you see through it. So it's almost a guide coat too.
So you actually tinted the Raptor in this case?
This is tinted Raptor, yeah. There's paint in the Raptor. Then spraying it out of a gun, you get a nice tight texture too. Raptor does come with a Raptor gun that's for doing undercoats. It gives it a chunkier look, but this one we wanted a nice tight texture.
I know prior to me working at the shop, and I'm sure a lot of people that watch videos, it's a little bit of struggle to see just how much time is invested in a high-end paint job, all the body work before the paint job. And you get your main components painted, like your cab and your bed. As you can see, we're going back a little bit because now we're focusing on the components. It just sometimes seems like it's endless, the amount of little pieces that also have to get body work and painted.
Yeah, whenever we do these things, it's not just body working a door or a fender or a tailgate or a cab. You're body working the entire side. So you treat the fender and door as if it's one piece. And whenever you do a car, you're treating the whole side as it's one piece. So it's a lot of time to body work everything together and make sure all the gaps are nice. Make sure the panel is nice. We take care of all the door dive and all that stuff too. Again, you can see that all the bare metal got epoxied before it got polyestered. And take care of that bare metal. Another thing that we do is we use plexiglass blocks. It's so much better than a Durablock or any of that other type of softer foam based block. It just gets a truer, straighter. It really shows in the end whenever you get the reflection, and it looks down like a mirror down the whole side. Of course, we'll still use our Durablocks with reverses and smaller areas, but for about 90% of the bodywork process, we'll use a plexiglass. You're doing all the final sanding on it. We'll wet sand it. Usually start with 400 and end with 600. Just makes it nice and clean, and after it's all wiped down, it's a good surface to paint on. We also do a mixture of spray on guide coat and dry guide coat. I know there's been a lot of questions about the dry guide coat. It works really good for filling in scratches, and you can really see once you're prepping for the next stage, it fills those scratches in black, so you really see them whenever you're doing the next step. And I think as 3M and Merca make a good one. So the wiping process, we like to use 203 from BASF. It's a wax and grease. Our Better Metal, like I was saying, that we use a 360-4. It's a metal prep, works great. And then we'll use a 139, which is a final wipe. We'll also use a water base. It's 910 to clean up any of the residue from the wet sanding. On our paint process, we'll paint 3 coats of base coat and just make sure it's covered. For metallics, we'll do another coat with an effect coat. That just evens everything out. And then most of these cars will do 5 coats of clear.
Again, the amount of time simply invested in laying out a stripe. I don't think everybody factors that in.
Yeah, it all depends on the car and what you're doing. You could do stripes on a Trans Am or a Camaro or Chevelle, Mustang, these C10 pickups. The amount of time it takes to lay out the stripes, make sure they're straight and nice, Even doing candy paint jobs, the amount of time it takes to do all that, and then with candies you got to put everything back together and then blow it all apart again to clear it. It's just a ton of time.
Here we can see a little bit of assembly work on the RS4 chassis. We got the coilovers, so just the last little bit there, the transfer case. As you see, while the body and paintwork was being done, Tony was over here doing the final assembly.
Also looking at time, just the amount of time it takes to mask for primer or mask for paint. The masking can take days.
Yeah, that's something I note when I'm taking pictures. You guys are fast at masking, but if you were an inexperienced masker, it's really got to add to the timeline.
Yeah, and you got to know where to mask too. You have certain break lines. Especially whenever you're priming or epoxying. It's very important whenever you're painting, especially because once it's painted, you're done.
Like Nick here, you see him doing various stages of the seam sealing as the parts are getting ready for paint. That's a whole nother step that people aren't entirely aware of.
Yeah, it's so much more than just putting paint on a vehicle. There's so many things you have to do that are small that you don't think about. And we also take great care whenever we do mask that we are masking correctly. It's really bad news whenever you finally clear something and then a piece of trim doesn't actually hide something or whatever. So we take great care in doing that.
It's always an exciting time seeing the final painted components going onto the chassis.
Nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Most of the engine-based stuff, especially for stock vehicles, we'll just do black them out. Do satin finish on them. The inner fenders, the inner sides of the fenders, we'll wrapper them, especially whenever you drive these things. Getting rocks or whatever, the wrapper's really a good product to use. It looks nice and clean too.
All right, guys, and now we've got the final assembly aspect of the build. Definitely the most nerve-wracking part with all the painted parts. So you can see Tony there is working on the factory GM wiring harness. He just pares those down as they have just components in them that we don't need. And that really sharp looking toolbox you can see there is by ProTech. You can see how we just tape the edges when we're hanging doors and fenders to keep anything from getting chipped. You see the LED taillights, and the driver's side taillight has the gas door feature built into it. We always dynomat our full restorations for sound deadening. So after Tony pares down, or often he will hand build wiring harnesses, and then he lays them out. Just everything is plug and play, really, really nice and clean. You can see that they're mounting the hydro boost on the firewall. When you do the pre-build during the metal fab part, it really makes this part a lot smoother. There's no additional holes that need to be drilled, and no holes that don't exist that shouldn't be there. So this is a Cheyenne level trim package, so it's got the two layers of the trim with the wood grain in them. Really offsets the stripe nicely. Got the core support and the inner fenders mounted up. Getting the front fenders mounted really makes it start to look like a truck. Heath bodyworking and painting the custom air intake tube. That small box you see there, Randy made with 2 6-inch subwoofers in it, and it really sounds impressive. I was shocked that 2 6-inch subwoofers could hit so hard. That's mounted right behind the factory console. Hardly even notice it's there. The gauges, those are Dakota Digital. They're RTX line. Looks like a factory gauge, but it's full digital. We run pretty much Dakota Digitals in all of our builds. They really do a great job, and it's a nice, clean install. OEM looking, but with all the functionality of a modern digital gauge. And there we have it. There's the finished truck. You guys can always watch the video again, but all these same photos are available on our website, metalworksclassics.com. Pretty much all of our full restorations have 1,000+ photos of the full build. You guys have any questions on a build like this, feel free to give the shop a call, 541-341-3372. And we'll also have some video for you guys to check out here at the end, so make sure you stick around for that.
This truck is a 1972 Chevrolet, started off life as a long bed half ton. It was the same color combination as it's currently. It's been all refreshed and repainted, but also we shortened the box down to a short box. And it's sitting on a Roadster Shop RS4 chassis, which is a pretty amazing off-road chassis that has some very high-end components that we'll show in a video. This is Ryan. He does most of the chassis sales here at MetalWorks. You'll probably talk to him on the phone if you call about a chassis. Great kid, knows a lot about these chassis and the trucks, and I'm gonna let him talk about this pickup.
So what we got here is a 72 Chevy pickup on a Roadster Shop RS4 chassis. This chassis, pretty innovative in the fact that it runs a modern coilover air bump suspension, a lot like what you'll see in a lot of off-road cars today. Very smooth ride. Has a Dana 44 front end, Curry 44 with a Curry Dana 60 rear, LT4 motor, 4L80 transmission with an Atlas 2-speed transfer case. Just something that is a all-around killer driving, killer handling truck with a very timeless, old school look. Under the hood of this truck, we have a 640 horse GM wet sump LT4. It has a Wagner Performance front accessory drive, gives you all of your water pump, alternator, AC compressor, really integrates that into an older hot rod situation like this. Running a Hydro Boost setup for the brakes and steering, really gives you that modern truck feel, nice firm pedal. Ron Davis radiator with the heat exchanger plumbed in for all of your supercharged situation that you're running there. Hand-built intake tube, PSC steering reservoir. All in all, just a really killer package. It's going to give you a good power. Again, 640 horsepower, and just a very reliable combination that you could drive daily and enjoy. Gonna go drive our 72 full build RS4 4-wheel drive Chevy pickup. This thing is absolutely a joy to drive over an old leaf spring truck. The coilovers, the air bumps, just really makes it have a feel of a modern pickup and something that you could drive and enjoy. Good mileage, modern overdrive transmission. Just really is a blast. The power of the LT4 on this thing just makes it effortless. Barely tow into it, and it moves. It's gonna be a fun truck. One benefit on the RS4 chassis is having that Dana 60 in the back. That Curry Dana 60 is going to hold that power, has the posi, everything that you need to really put it down and not worry about breaking it. The Dana 44 in the front, going to work really well also. For a four-wheel drive pickup, that moves pretty well. Overall, just a really killer truck with a great chassis, great GM performance motor package, something that you can, again, really drive and enjoy, and isn't a buckboard like an old leaf spring truck. These things really, really are refined.